Hello and welcome. My name is Chris from ChristopherHole.com, and welcome to this video where we're going to be looking at how we can use exercise to reduce low back pain. There are obviously more components to this where you can look at sort of postures in lifestyle, sitting, standing, being static for a prolonged period of time. You can look at mental stress and things like that, because it's known that mental stress can put tension into joints or make a tense joint even more tense if you're mentally stressed. But we're not going to look at any of those other variables at the moment. We know there are other variables. All we're going to look at is how we can use exercise in the best way possible to reduce low back pain. And in this first slide, I just want to help you understand a little bit about your body and about everybody's body, and a few little, I guess, sort of principles that will help us with our exercise for low back pain. So the first principle is your body is adaptable, in that it can move in many directions. So it can move many ways in many different directions. So it can move for a long period of time, i.e. an endurance event or a lot of walking, or it can move in one explosive act, which by definition would be known as strength. But it can also move in many directions. So it can move forwards and back, it can move sideways, it can twist, or it can rotate. It's got many different joints, obviously ankle, knee, hip, or the vertebrae, the spine, the shoulders, the shoulder girdle, the elbow, the wrists, the fingers, the toes, and the neck. So it's got all of those different points of movement, and each point of movement can move in a different direction to another point of movement. So you could step to the side whilst reaching forward. So there are many combinations of how you can move, and in a way that's kind of what our body wants. If we just get stuck into one way of moving, then that's how our body will build itself, or it will adapt itself in that way. But because our body is built for many different movements, it can create tension in places where it wants to move, but you aren't moving it, if you can sort of follow my wording. So what we have to be able to do is we have to create a body that is adaptable to anything that could be put in front of us. It could be climbing over a wall, it could be ducking under something, it could be walking forward, it could be walking to the side, it could be jumping forward, jumping to the side, it could be twisting. So it needs to be able to do any of those, because if we only train one way and we become very good at doing a few things, when we are called to do other things, then we could come up against a problem. Okay, if that sort of makes sense. So sort of principle number one is our body is it wants to be adaptable, because life can throw us anything. The next one is it's built to be mobile, and I've just put under there class 3 levers, or third class levers. And basically what this means is, if you can see the picture on the right hand side there, you've got fulcrum, effort and load, and you can see an arm there with a bicep. Now this is the lever that is most prevalent in anyone's body, in your body, in my body, in everyone's body. And you can liken it to a drawbridge. So if you can look at that arm there and picture it as a drawbridge. Now obviously as a drawbridge, the bicep muscle that's coming down would be attached nearer the wrist. Now that's obviously there to be strong. The further away the effort that you can see there as the little red arrow comes away from the fulcrum and closer to the load, the higher the load can be. So with a drawbridge, it's a very strong, robust type lever. But as the effort sort of comes towards the fulcrum, it can't cope with as heavy a load. So it's then wanting to be mobile, which is how our body wants to be. First, it wants to be adaptable and it wants to be able to move in many directions, but it also wants to be mobile within those many directions. Okay, and then the third one is limbs move, core stabilizes, and we can understand this by the type of joints that begins the limbs, which is the ball and socket joint. Now obviously the ball and socket joint can move in many different directions, which sort of applies to this adaptable principle of the body. Now we're not going to necessarily look too much at the adaptable side of things again, but we're looking at the difference between the limbs and the core, because the core is the foundation that your body moves from. So if we take a fence post that's been cemented into the ground, if we try to move that, it's going to be very, very stable. That's how our core wants to be. It wants to be that solid cement post. So when our limbs do move, it's got that solid foundation to push from. I could use another example. If we take a 100-meter sprinter, when they put their blocks on the floor, they have to screw them into the floor. So when the limbs create huge amounts of force, what they're pushing against stays stable, so they're able to propel that force in the direction that they want to go. So we could think of our core as those blocks. Our core wants to stay nice and stable, so when our limbs create force to lift something from the floor, we've got that stable foundation to push against, and it makes our movement that much more efficient and that much more stable. So those are just three very simple principles of the body. What we're now going to look at in the next slide is the progression of sort of training, and how we need to manage our training, and how we need to use exercise, or how we can use exercise to most benefit our body, but first of all our low back pain, and keep that to a minimum. So on this slide we have a training method. Now this is the training method that I use, that in some ways I've developed, that I've been using with my clients now for coming on for 4 to 5 years. It's taken a bit of time to develop. I haven't thought of it all on my own. I have used various other methods to understand what I'm doing, so from other trainers, but for the most part this is what I've built, and this is how I go about overcoming low back pain. So first of all, we do exercise for low back pain. So we may have a person, or let's take the most extreme example. They've been to a surgeon and they've had some sort of surgery on their back. They've gone to a physio and they've been rehabilitated for, I don't know, say 12 weeks or 24 weeks or however long it's taken, and they are now ready to start exercising or start using a gym. So what would happen is we would go straight in with the exercise for low back pain. Now what that means is it's about learning movement and posture. So that's the first one, because as a mechanical cause of low back pain, we know that it's the sort of the improper use of the human body. So poor posture, poor movement, incorrect use of the spine, and possibly incorrect use of the hips, knees, ankles, shoulders, elbows, and wrists. So we understand that we've got to learn how to move, and we've got to learn sort of good postures, not only whilst we move, but also in that static posture as well. What we also do is we build a basic core endurance. Now we don't build core strength, because strength is the amount of force that you can apply in one contraction. Endurance is the amount of tolerance our muscle can endure without fatigue. And that's what we want to build within our core, because if we are learning correct movement and correct posture, we want to be able to hold that over a prolonged period of time. So this is where the core endurance comes from. So number one, we start learning to move. We start building better movement and better posture. At the same time as that, we build in a good sort of basic core endurance. So we're not looking for, world record breaking sort of plank holds. We're just looking to get into a basic level so we can start to manage how we move and how we feel throughout the day. And then as we start moving through and we start building the correct movement and the correct core endurance, we then move on to mobilizing joints. So mobilizing joints is things like increasing range of movement, increasing flexibility in the joints, because we know that a more supple and better moving body with mobile joints has less low back pain. But again, it's not just the range of movement. So you can have great range of movement at your hips, but if you don't move properly, then we are potentially going to be experiencing low back pain. So not only do we need mobilizing joints, we need mobilizing joints with good correct movement and good correct posture. Okay, so all of those three sort of work towards exercise for low back pain. Now again, all of those are low load, if any. We may be lifting body weight, we may be lifting very low weights. Okay, so it's sort of a low intensity beginning. So now we've started building correct movement, core endurance and mobilizing joints. What we would then move on to is a slightly more intense element of training, which is exercise for general health, I call. Now, again, if you come to my website, if you come to my one-day workshops, you'll be able to find out the difference sort of between health and fitness a little bit more. But for the most part, what we're looking for in just general health comes back to the sort of the first principle, which is the adaptability. So we start building sort of a whole body endurance. So with the movements that we've learnt in exercise for low back pain, we start building on top of that good whole body endurance in multiple directions. What we would also start doing is building a whole body strength as well, because there are occasions where we do need to lift heavy things around. Obviously in exercise for low back pain, our body can't necessarily tolerate that first of all. So we don't do that until we've got that good base of endurance. Once we've got whole body endurance and then a whole body strength, a little bit more explosive, so we will start to use slightly heavier weights, we would then move on to a more of a general type of fitness. Now fitness is different to health. Health is a very general, whole body, basic endurance and strength. What we start doing is we continue with the whole body strength, and we would continue with the endurance and the learning of good movement and posture and mobilizing joints. So we wouldn't just finish exercise for low back pain and then not do any flexibility again. All of them would be incorporated. It's just as we move through this, we start to incorporate more to it, and we may just take out a little bit of the core endurance, but build in more whole body endurance. So we're still getting the endurance, just in a different form, if that makes sense. So we're not just starting one thing and then stopping, and then starting the next thing and then stopping. It's a very dynamic, they very much intertwine with each other because it is a very holistic process. It's a very integrated process. So these bullet points don't necessarily give the best picture for the training that is being done, but these are the maybe the differences between, or how the progressions move between the four stages. So as we move into a sort of a general fitness, we then start looking a little bit more of a power and speed. Now what power and speed do is they make things a little bit more explosive, but we have quickness with that explosive nature of things. So we may start bringing in things like plyometrics, which is sort of an explosive exercise, if that makes sense. So again, if you come to the workshop, you'll be able to, I'll be able to explain the difference in a little bit more depth. Obviously on a computer screen it's a little bit harder, but we start building in a little bit more intensity. But again, it's still very general in the way that we move, because we're still trying to build that adaptability within our body. We're still trying to move in various different directions. We're still trying to keep our core working to stabilize and our limbs working to mobilize, if that makes sense. And then the final one is the sport specific training. So if we progress all the way through and they want to get back into running, into bodybuilding, into cycling or football, or whatever it might be, whatever the sport is, this is where we then bring in the sport specific training, things like agility, reaction time, the specific movements that are needed for those sports. But we don't bring those in until we've laid the foundation and built the intensity into the body, because it was Benno Nig, who is a biomechanist who's over in Canada. He's a professor over in, I think it's University of Calgary. He says the biggest cause of injury is doing too much, too soon, too heavy, at too high an intensity. So what we're looking to do is progress a deconditioned body into a very conditioned body, but in a very logical and progressive manner. But from a very basic state in coming back from a low back pain injury all the way up into a sport specific sort of movement patterns, which are very specific patterns. So we're building that adaptable body that can move in any which way that we need it to, but we're building the sport specific movements, which are very specific movements, which if you're a 100-meter sprinter is just in one direction. So but we're building that on top of this very general, because the last thing they want to be doing is getting out of their car and injuring themselves, because then that's going to put them back for their sport. Okay, so that's the kind of training method that you need to start applying to coming back from an injury. It doesn't just have to be low back pain. That could be exercise for hip pain. That could be exercise for damaged knee ligaments, or could be exercise for ACL recovery. You know, you've got to be able to build that general foundation and then move it into that specific sort of patterns of movement for the sports. Okay, so again, if you want to come watch more videos, please come to the website christopherhall.com. It's been great talking to you in this video. I hope to speak to you in another one.